Hi guys, it's Sophie. So welcome to part 1 of my 5,000 subscriber Q&A. Yeah, 5,000 people watch my videos. That is kind of crazy. When I very first started filming, I had in my head that I thought one day I could get to 10,000 subscribers, and I thought that was like the best possible scenario that I could ever imagine. So before I even turned on the camera. And I thought, like, that was my like absolute highest point that I thought this channel could ever reach. And to know that I've only been doing this for 2 years and I've managed to find 5,000 people who want to watch is really, really lovely. And obviously it's not all about numbers. Like, I do this because I like it and because I really like chatting with everyone. No one always says this, but like that is what you get from BookTube, is the interaction with other people and other readers. I just love it, and like thank you to all of you, like those who've been with me kind of forever and you've seen like the last 2 years of my life kind of unfold, and those of you who've just shown up, you know, today. This is your first video. Hi, welcome. I hope this is a nice place on the internet for you all. I hope that you feel safe here and happy here, and that my little corner of the internet is kind of an intellectually curious but accepting place to be. That's what I hope I'm making here. And yeah, just thank you all ever so much. So I'm going to stop blabbing now and I'm going to get on with some of the questions you've asked me, because I know that Q&As are popular for celebrations, so that's what you've got this time. Yeah, so this video is going to be the bookish questions that you've asked me. These are all off the cuff answers. I haven't prepared answers or scripted anything for this video. So yeah, bear the bell in mind as I go through, but hopefully you enjoy it anyhow. So question 1 is, how do you go about selecting books in a bookstore? Do I take a list, or do I just kind of go by what takes my fancy? So it would be really rare that I took a list of books either physically or in my head when I'm going book shopping. That's not how I do that. If I want something specifically, I'll buy it online. When I go to bookshops, it's because I want to explore and try and find something new. So whilst occasionally I'll buy stuff I know is out in a bookshop, most of the time I use bookshops as a chance to branch out from what I'm reading. And I tend to go with bookshops with like a feeling or a mood or a topic in mind that I'm interested in, and then just spend the time looking for things that kind of appeal to me within that range. So I might go in thinking I want some philosophy of some kind, and I'll go and look through the philosophy sort of section, and something will jump to me and I'll go, yeah, cool, I'm going to read about that for a bit. And that's kind of how I think about things when I'm buying books in bookshops. If I know what I want, I'll nearly always order it online because it's just cheaper, and unless I need it like ASAP, you know, it's fairly convenient. And the next question is book recommendations for a nature lover. The first book that jumps to my mind is one that I think is called Gossip from the Forest, or Gossip in the Forest. I'll find it and I'll link it down below. I read it a while ago, but I really loved it. It's all centred around English woodland, and it has fairy story retellings throughout, and I think it's really good. As I say, I read it a few years ago, but I did really enjoy it, and it just gives you a good sense of like the outdoors. I think she describes woodland really well, so there's that one. Book recommendations for a dancer is the next one. Now, I actually have to say that I come up completely blank with this. I did have a bit of a think, and I don't think I own any books in which there are dancers. I genuinely don't. The only ones I have read are ones that have to do with eating disorders, and I doubt that's what you are after. Yeah, I don't know, there's one that's called, I think it's called The Crane's Dance, that I know lots of people have been chatting about, that's to do with ballet, but I've not read it, and I don't think I've ever actually read a book with a dancer in it. Guys, help me out, leave all your dancer recommendations down below. Book recommendations for a foodie is the next one. And again, like, I'm rubbish with food. I'm crap. I don't really enjoy cooking food. I quite like eating food, but not enough to bother cooking food. I cook what I need to survive rather than it being like an enjoyable thing. That said, there are some really nice cookbooks that I have, and I think one of them is like, I have like an Essential New York one, and there's one that's exactly the same but like an Essential Venice one from memory, and they do like areas of food. I'll link them down below because I have the New York one down below, but the idea is to try and give you the chance to make at home like the kind of food that's popular in a city, and I quite like the idea of that because I think travel appeals to me more than food, and like that feels like another way of doing that. So sometimes if I'm reading a book set in New York, I'll eat some New York food, but yeah, I don't know, I don't collect cookbooks, I don't buy or haul cookbooks, it's just not really my cup of tea. Someone asked what my favourite Stephen King novel is. That's a really hard one because I really love a lot of his stuff. The first thing that jumped into my head was Carrie, because that's the first one I read. It's short, I think it's a really good story, but everyone kind of knows Carrie, and I think probably the one I enjoyed the most and creeped me out the most was probably the Tommyknockers. And not a lot of people like the Tommyknockers, but I still feel weird thinking about reading the Tommyknockers, and I think it's just a subject matter I find that really scary, but I really do think that's a good book. Or Under the Dome. Those are kind of the three that I would go with. Under the Dome's ending's a bit weak, but the story's fabulous, and it's massive and the characters are so brilliant, so I think one of those three. Probably Carrie is the one I feel most sure on, but genuinely I love all of Stephen King's books. There's not been one that's fallen completely flat with me yet. I really quite like From a View as well, but anyway, yeah, there's loads. I think Carrie, if I have to push myself to go for one. My favourite Stephen King movie adaptation, there are so many. Like, I kind of love The Mist. Like, there are better movies. Like The Green Mile is a fantastic movie, Shawshank Redemption's a fantastic movie. But I kind of love The Mist. Like, I think The Mist is the one that felt the most like King when you watch it, because The Shining's so taken over by Kubrick that you don't really have a chance for that. And I think The Green Mile and Shawshank are things, the film feels so much a thing in itself. I think The Mist is the one that feels enough like a Stephen King feel for me to say that feels like his film. Though I know there's kind of changes to the actual book, but yeah, I mean, let's be honest, Stephen King, his movies, like, do you know what I mean? Like, for the movies that have been adapted from his book, like, you can tell how fantastic a storyteller he is when you look at how many movies have been made from his work and how well those movies have done in general. It's just, he's just a master. I just love him so much. Okay, so top 5 translated fictions. The next one I'm going to try and be quick. I'm going to go for Era, I'm going to go for Agalusa, I'm going to go for Saramago. Who else can I think of who I absolutely love? One I don't talk about very much is actually Neruda. I really love his poetry. And then who else can I think of who's been really good, really impressive? Do you know what, of late, just because I've just read it and I think it was so good, David Grossman, because I think A Horse Witch and Jafar is fabulous. The next one was, have you ever written a novel? Would you ever write a novel? I've written novels. I used to write a lot, and for a while I thought that was what I would do with myself, and I've very much lost faith in that as a thing. But I have written novels. I've written 5 novels, I don't know, probably 50 or 60 finished short stories, 100, 200 maybe poems. So yeah, I have written stuff. I've had a couple pieces published, just short stories, but I've never published a novel, and to be honest, it's something that I don't think I'm good enough at to do, but it's something I still kind of wish I could. Someone asked what my favourite book to film adaptations are. I'm going to say, do you know what, Stephen King's are fabulous, because I think they're so good in their own right. Like, if you read The Shining, you can love The Shining as King's The Shining, and you can watch Kubrick's The Shining and have 2 different things from the same source, and that's just kind of clever. So yeah, I think to be honest, if I look at kind of that as a whole, that would probably be one. That said, Hitchcock, like The Birds by Daphne du Maurier and Hitchcock, like that's another one that is really, really brilliant. I think you can do a lot of really interesting things when you adapt a book to a film, but I think you have to make it something new. People fall over and slip up when they try and just copy it, because it never really works. You have to try and make it the directors rather than the writers if it's really going to work. So yeah, I think film adaptations of books where they have that separation are the ones that I tend to like the most. Someone asked when I first started reading, and I don't know whether they mean like ever or whether they mean recently, because ever, My mum found me reading to myself one day. Like, I taught myself to read. She didn't teach me to read, like, after she kind of went over it, but like, I taught myself to read my own storybooks when I was a little girl, and I used to sleep with books like in my crib when I was a baby, rather than like soft toys. So kind of always. More recently, I didn't read so much when I was at uni because I was doing a very technical degree, and it was really, really fucking hard work, and I just didn't have time to read things that weren't uni books. So I read a lot more after that, but to be honest, as soon as uni was over, reading was the thing that I spent most of my time on. So probably since I was 20 or so, I've read fairly consistently as my hobby, and I always had done before I went to uni, so the answer is kind of always. The next question is, if you could take the characters from one book and put them in another book, which book would you choose and where would you put them? I want to see, and I know this sounds mad, I want to see the characters from The Secret History in a Harry Potter university. I want to see that so badly. I think that'd be fabulous. I love like the elitism, like I imagine them as like, maybe like they were Slytherins and now they were just causing this mess in this elite university. I would love that, like almost a little bit like Lev Grossman's The Magicians, them. Someone asked if I'd ever read any Dutch literature. The only one I can find that I've read from this year is No Two Persons Have Read the Same Book. I'm pretty sure it's published by a Dutch guy. I don't remember if I've read anything before then, but I feel like I have. I feel like I did last year. I can't remember off the top of my head what it would have been. But yeah, I read fairly consistently through Europe because I think we get a lot of European translations over here. But I can't remember off the top of my head if I read anything that like felt really Dutch anyway. But yeah, I definitely read one this year so far. The next question is, what's the last book that made you cry? The last book that made me cry was The Unseen. It wasn't really that sad of a book, it was just this one little section about this woman who had little scars on her temples, and sometimes I cry when suddenly I'm hit by something. Like normally when I cry in books, it's a really tiny detail that hits me really hard, and that was exactly what that was. And I just had a few like tears and then kept going. But I read books that make me cry fairly regularly. Like I would say I probably cry once a month at least, reading something, maybe once every other week. And that's kind of normal. I get affected by stuff I read, and sometimes it makes me cry, and I'm fine with that. So I had another question that was, what's the most valuable book you have? And that's a really interesting question because it could be, as I said, monetary or emotional value. Monetarily, it's probably the Bachman books because it has Raid in it, and this book I've seen going in like similar condition for like 300 quid. So probably monetarily, this battered little thing. For me, like in an emotional way, it's probably not a book, but I have notebooks that I've written in for the whole of my life. I've always written letters to myself, like from being 8. And probably those are like the whole of, you don't really see them, but the whole of the top shelf above my comics are just notepads of letters I've written to myself or to other people that I've never sent. And they act like a record of my life. Letters are a really important part of who I am, and I write letters to myself and to other people without the intention of sending them to figure myself out. And I think if I lost those, that would be the greatest loss to me personally. But yeah, they're probably the most emotionally valuable things I have in my library. The next question is, do you seek out particular translations of foreign literature? To be honest, no, I don't. I don't feel as though I know enough about translated fiction yet to notice the difference between translations, and the reality is I don't tend to reread classics. I can't remember the last time I did, and they're the only ones I can think of where I'd feel there would be so many different translations that it would matter. That's kind of my feeling about it, but that's just where I am at the moment. So no, I don't seek out particular translations. I don't actually seek out whether or not they're even considered to be good before I start. I just kind of go with what I think, you know, that'll be fine, I'll get the gist of it. If I loved a book, maybe I would seek out more translations, but I've not yet had that. The next question is there a specific book that makes you feel better or less overwhelmed? To be perfectly honest, no. There's not one thing that is automatically going to make me feel better. When I'm not well at all, I actually can't read because my brain can't process information very well. That said, 448 Psychosis is the one that I read when I'm a little bit less than rock bottom, because it reminds me of where I was, and that's really helpful for me. But there's nothing that makes me feel better that I have found yet that I can read. Generally books they aren't enough for me when I'm not well. Sometimes if I'm just like having a bad day, like a normal, you know, neurotypical bad day, then yeah, like books can distract me, but when I'm not well, I can't access that really. Someone asked me what the best book I read in my childhood was and why it was the best. I think it was probably the Windsinger series, and I haven't ever spoken about this on this channel, but those books are so good. Mumpo was incredible. Like, the fact I still remember them now, like 10, 15 years on from having read them, just testifies to it. Like, those books I think are just so well done, and it was the first time I thought about having like a segregated society and like what that means, and yeah, I think they're brilliant children's books. I think they're a good story, and I think they've got really good messages as well about like the ways in which we separate from the people around us and how we relate to people that we perceive to be above or below us. Yeah, so I think they're really good children's books, and they're probably the series that I remember most from my childhood. I was asked what fictional world I'd most like to live in, with fictional being like any fictional world. So I totally know what I'm going to say for this. Okay, there's a game called Firewatch. If you haven't played Firewatch, go and play Firewatch. It's fantastic. It's about this man who gets called out to the middle of nowhere in the forest to go and watch for fires, and he lives in this little cabin, and every time I turn on that damn game and play, the only thing I want to do is transport myself to that cabin and have like a month of just being up in that little home, looking out over the forest, and being able to go on walks, and just, Firewatch is amazing. There are some games that sometimes when I'm feeling stressed, a bit like the book question, this is probably what I do instead, that I have set up on my computer in a calm place that I like, and I'll go and interact there for 5 or 10 minutes, and I do that with Firewatch, I do that with Gone Home. Both of those, I'd feel comfortable living in the bedroom of Gone Home for a significant period of time. And I know that sounds weird, but both of those games have a calmness to them that I think is gorgeous. And if you don't normally play video games even, they're both storytelling video games. They both rely on like voiceovers, almost like a podcast, and if you haven't played lots of games but you love stories, you will like these games, I promise you. The next question is, do you have any specific authors that you haven't yet read that you're trying to get to? I have hundreds of authors I haven't yet read that I'm trying to get to. I never really know like how to choose between the ones I want to read next, because there are so many. Like, I need to read more Hemingway. I've only read one Hemingway. There's like I'm trying to read more James Baldwin at the moment. I've read a couple of his now, but I want to read more Naomi Klein. I want to read more Chomsky. Like, I want to read, like, I haven't read Jane Eyre, I haven't read like Pride and Prejudice. I'd like to read those. I'd like to read Crime and Punishment. Like, there are so many things I want to have the chance to get to, and so many people I want to have the chance to get to, and it frustrates me that I don't have time to do everything. But yeah, there's literally hundreds of authors, hundreds of books that I try to get to, and I genuinely struggle knowing I can't do that. I know I can do some, but yeah, like my TBR in my head is far bigger than my TBR would ever be on Goodreads. I think probably in terms of people I want to get to soon, I'd wanted to get to Philip Rothman and Paul Auster for a long time, because I know they're like big names at the current time I haven't read, and Jonathan Franzen as well I've never read anything from. So like, they're all big authors, they're all like typical stereotypical male white authors that I think, but they're ones that people shout about that I've never read. So probably they're my next ones on my list, just so I can say I've read them, and then like, not so I can boast about it, but just so I can like have in my head, yeah, I've at least acknowledged that. Sam Rushdie is another person I'd like to read from soon, because a lot of what I read references his work, I think it's a him, and I've never read anything or don't know anything about the author at all, so that could be kind of interesting. I'd really like to try and read some Wittgenstein, because again, lots of stuff I read references that. Some Derrida, because a lot of the stuff I read references that, and it's frustrating not to get what people are going on about. I'd like to try and read some Freud in its original if I can. I think that would be good. There's loads of stuff, there's literally hundreds of things. You could ask me that question, I could go on for hours. And the very last question is, how do I choose books? Fairly kind of broad. It's really hard. I tried to explain a little bit about how I do bookshops, and I'm going to try and do, so the last question, I'm going to get super comfy now, but what I do, I think, is I go around a bookshop, or I go around like on Goodreads, and I select a list of the things I'm interested in, and I whittle it down until it's the ones that I would not feel right to leave behind. And those are the books I take home. People quite often say, like, I enjoy the books you read, like, where do you find them? I have a really tiny local Waterstones, like, I really do, and I don't have a lot of choice as to where I shop for books in person. Go online if you want stuff that's different to what you're finding at home, and if you are just not finding stuff in your bookshops, you need to delve a bit more and go through the shelves and see the things that aren't looking so popular at the moment, but kind of like read the backs of stuff. Obviously Goodreads is a great way to know about stuff. I get some stuff through publishers, so you can always look at, like, publishers have on most of their websites available for kind of everyone, like their catalogue, so you can see what's coming up if you want to see like new releases and stuff. But yeah, how I choose books and how I decide what to take home is the books I couldn't leave. I think that's probably the fairest way to assess that. I'm going to say goodbye now, my camera is about to die, but I will film the second half of my video soon, which will be the non-bookish questions I've been asked. Thank you all ever so much for asking the questions that you have. Hopefully if your question's been in here, my answer's been somewhat satisfactory. If not, I do apologise, and I'll see you soon in my next video. Bye guys.